So what we have done thus far, we have started by trying to understand the principle of ultrasound. Then second, we move to how to deal with our machine, get to know the buttons and how can you use these buttons in order to improve the quality of the picture. And now I'm taking you a step forward, that is the step forward, the step, how can I, with my probe, with the probe in my hand, get some images and what these images mean, and which is the best way of getting useful clinical information. Well, the learning objective of this lecture are that at the end you will be able to explain how to assess the fetal lie, the placental localization, and the amniotic fluid volume. The key questions we have to ask ourselves are what sequences of probe movements are required in order to assess the following steps: the lie and the presentation, the number of fetuses, the placental site, and the amniotic fluid volume. For those of you who have already experience with ultrasound, maybe this lecture will seem extremely easy, but I think that you have to realize the fact that is the way you should teach a systematic approach to the use of ultrasound. And we have to realize that obstetric ultrasound has got some inherent difficulties, which are depending on the operator, are depending on the complexity of the anatomy of the fetal organs, on the fact that the fetus is moving, and sometimes we have to follow the fetus. It's not that we use certain movements and we will see everything, because the fetus may change position, and that there is some shadowing of anatomical regions that we want to investigate. Shannon gave some examples. For instance, you want to investigate the heart, but the heart is shadowed by the spine. If the fetus is lying with the spine anterior, you will not be able to get sufficient views of the heart, and you have to change your probe orientation in order to get as good as possible visualization of the heart anatomy. And then one of the biggest problems, and is becoming increasingly bigger, is the fact that with women with high BMI, the quality of the picture is inferior. And we have really to be very skillful in using our technical abilities to really obtain as good as possible images in challenging circumstances. Why are we proposing this 6-step approach? It may sound as a kind of an oversimplification, but it's very important because it enhances training, and as a result it will minimize the time that you need to go through these steps. It introduces consistency in image acquisition and interpretation. It allows for an efficient examination, because within a number of movements you will already get all the important information that you need, and especially it will shorten your learning curve and provide you with some paths to automation. This concept of the 6-step approach has been published in the literature by Alfred Ambuamad, who is a very important person within ISWOG, especially for his tremendous contribution to basic training. He has really thought very carefully which are the important movements, which are the important information, and he has put this down in this 6-step approach, which at the end will tell you how the fetus is lying, if the fetus is alive, if there is cardiac activity, if there is one fetus or more, and also will give you some information on the position of the placenta, on the volume of the amniotic fluid, and then the next step will be to perform correctly fetal biometry, but I will not cover this last point because it will be a subject of a next lecture. Also, in the recommendation that I showed you in the first lecture, this systematic approach and the important questions that we have to answer are pointed out. Maybe in a slightly different order, but they are exactly the same. So let's see now in practical terms, how do we start? So we have a pregnant woman in front of us, and first of all, we want to know whether the fetus is lying in a vertex or in a bridge presentation. So typically, we will place our probe, bearing in mind where is right and where is left, immediately above the symphysis and holding it in a transversal position. And then what we could do is just tilt the probe, and you can see here exactly the movement, and this will tell you whether the structure that you have under your probe is the So one scenario is that the structure that you see is the head. You can see it here. And then by making this tilting movement, you will navigate through the head. The other scenario is that it will be bridge, and then you may see the feet, you may see the knee, you may see the buttock of the baby. And then there is a third scenario, and it's the scenario where you will see amniotic fluid. And maybe you will also see a placenta on the posterior wall of on the anterior wall. And we know that very often a transverse lie or oblique lie is associated with a low-lying placenta, which is in actual fact in the way and therefore preventing that the fetus is lying either in bridge or in vertex presentation. So always think of a placental position when you see that the inferior uterine segment is empty. Why it doesn't want to move? Okay. And then the second step, which is assessing cardiac activity. So we have our probe just above the symphysis. What we will do, we will slide the probe, make a movement towards the umbilicus of the mother, and there we may be able to see the heart of the baby and therefore to appreciate cardiac activity. If the heart is not there, then what we have to do is to move our probe from that position to the right or to the left. Because we know that if the fetus is in bridge presentation or in vertex presentation, the heart will be a little bit higher than, let's say, immediately above the symphysis, and it will be approximately half away, so in correspondence more or less of the umbilicus of the mother. So let's see this movement. So we slide our probe to the level of the umbilicus, and then if we don't see there the cardiac activity, we will move it to the right of the patient, and respectively to the left. Then we move to the third step, which is the number of fetuses. Also, this is very important, and it's very important to be systematic because, as Shannon very importantly said, especially with these curvilinear probes, where you can also rock your probe from one side to another, sometimes you can create images which are not correct. So it's very important that you always keep your probe exactly perpendicular to the floor, and only when you will be more advanced and you will be more capable of using all the different movements of the probe and interpreting what you're doing, you can go ahead with these extra skills. But we want now to assess the number of the fetuses. So what we will do is we are above the symphysis. We will move up. And if we don't have an image which is, let's say, clear enough, because we don't see, for instance, the fetal spine, we will move to the right of the mother and then slide our probe towards the fundus of the uterus, and then repeat the same procedure on the other side. And we may also use, to have a more complete information, the same principle, but by sliding the probe from the right of the mother to the left, higher up, or at a lower level from the right to the mother to the left, or the other way around. I mean, it doesn't really important, it's not really important where you start, as long as you have, by doing so, navigated the whole uterus and therefore established if there is one spine, one head, of two spines, two heads, in their respective position. And then, in actual fact, with the same kind of approach, we can also identify the placental position. So what we will do with the placenta, we will rather start from the fundal height, and from the fundus, we will, with the probe not anymore in a transversal, but in a perpendicular, in a sagittal position, we will navigate along the uterus in three ideal lines. And what we will see is that, for instance, if the placenta is has got a fundal position, we will see this is the fundus of the uterus, and we will see the placenta here, let's say on the fundus, and also extending a little bit to the anterior wall. Or we may have an anterior placenta, and we may find it especially on this line 2 here. And we may have even a placenta which is anterior, but which goes down, almost reaching the internal, also the cervical canal. And in this case, but we will see it later this afternoon, we will call this placental low lying. And obviously, it could also be that the placenta is lying posteriorly, and especially in advanced pregnancy, it may be more challenging to evaluate exactly the placental position because fetal parts may be in front of it and obstructing our views. So let's see how we do this. So look at the position of the probe. The probe is always kept, whether you hold it transversally or longitudinally, perpendicular to the floor. I think this is quite clear. I remember at the beginning of my career, that there was a much more senior colleague of mine, and he told me, look, this is a twin pregnancy. And I said, are you sure? Yes. And he was using the curvilinear probe. Look, there is a head there, and there is a head there. So in actual fact, it was, there was one head, but by rocking his transducer, it was producing a head up and a head down. So this is a really important, underlines the fact that we should always use our transducer perpendicular to the floor, and only when we are more advanced then we can adventure in more tricks. Well, step number 5, estimation of the amniotic fluid. I think that you are all familiar with this concept of the amniotic fluid index. What we have to do in actual fact is to think of the maternal abdomen as subdivided in 4 quadrants, starting from the umbilicus. So we have one quadrant, which is the head of the mother is here. So the first one is on the right side of the mother up. Then there is another quadrant which is also towards the head of the mother but to her left. And then we have a third one which is below the level of the umbilicus on the right side of the mother, and a fourth one which is on the left side of the mother at the same height. So what we do by using this subdivision in 4, and I mean you can also decide yourself which order you want to follow as long as you measure all 4 pockets. We have to measure the largest perpendicular pocket, not including fetal parts. We will see this afternoon in detail how to measure the amniotic fluid either in a semi-quantitative way with the amniotic fluid index or only by measuring the deepest pocket. But anyway, by doing this, you will see where is the deepest pocket, and you can judge on the volume of the amniotic fluid, whether this is normal or not. And then the 6th step is the biometry, fetal biometrical measurements. But as I told you before, I'm not going to talk on this because it will be the subject of another lecture. So we have used this approach to teach people who haven't got any experience with ultrasound. How can they very rapidly, in a small number of maneuvers, get as much information as possible in a systematic way on the questions that I have outlined. And this system seems to work extremely well. I mean, it's really a matter of getting the automatism of these movements. And in actual fact, it was even possible to examine how much time was necessary to perform these 6 steps in the 2nd and in the 3rd trimester. And as you can see, as far as the presentation and the cardiac activity is concerned, there was no difference in the time required to get this information in the 2nd or in the 3rd trimester. The difference was not significant. Whereas, if you want to look at the number of fetuses, it may be more tricky in the 3rd trimester because it will require more time because the surface of the uterus is much larger. Placenta localization didn't really matter between 2nd and 3rd trimester. Amniotic fluid, it was strangely enough, it took more time in the 2nd trimester as compared to the 3rd, because in the 2nd trimester you have more amniotic fluid, relatively speaking. Let's say the fetus occupies less surface in the uterine cavity than the amniotic fluid. And the step 6 biometry was obviously much more challenging in the third trimester because the fetus is larger and therefore it will take more time to perform the measurements. This is very important. This Alfred Abouhamad that I mentioned already, a key person in promoting the systematic approach to basic ultrasound, has published a book, a practical approach to ultrasound in obstetrics and gynecology, and this book is available online. You can download it for free by using this link. And until now, more than 25,000 copies have been downloaded, and the book has also been translated in a number of languages. I really advise you to have a look at it because it's a fantastic book which takes you through the basic of ultrasound and then a step forward in this kind of a systematic approach. So I got to the end of my presentation. And the key points of this presentation are that ultrasound examination in the second and in the third trimester of pregnancy should be approached in a very systematic fashion. The sequence is, first of all, fetal presentation, then check heartbeats, then the number of fetuses, then the placental position, then evaluate the volume of the amniotic fluid, and then as last perform biometrical measurement. It seems a little bit oversimplification, but I can guarantee you that if you follow these steps, you will enhance your confidence and be sure that at every examination you have got all the essential information that you need. And this was the end. And I'm very curious to know whether you have questions. And we will also have a look if there are questions from the other groups. Well, I must say that the other groups are very quiet. Well, we stimulate you to ask questions. You can just write them down and we will see them.
Katia, thanks for that. And maybe on a lighter note, Sue Walker helped us at our last basic course, and she starts off with, "Hello baby, where are you? Are you alive? How many of you are there?" And then maybe we can add something about, you know, where's your placenta, where's your food, have you got water, and how big are you?
So it's very interesting to see that even by using slightly different approaches, the key messages are the same. So what I would like to know from you, what is your level of knowledge of ultrasound? How many of you are really starters? Okay, quite a lot, yeah. So from tomorrow onwards, well, from Monday onwards, you will start practicing this concept.